everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Aaron Porras with ILTV's weekly program, One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. We want to give you, our viewers, the chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Today we have a special edition of the show where we recapture the finest moments in commentary, bringing you the best of One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. Many leaders and great thinkers have joined the show to ask Professor Dershowitz about peace, politics, and policy, and we've selected a special few for this edition of the show, so let's begin.
All right, so let's get started, Professor. As you know, we always open our show with special guests. Today, our first guest is Ambassador Dan Shapiro, who recently completed his tenure as United States Ambassador to Israel. He's currently decided to stay in Israel at the most prestigious think tank in the country. So let's hear what's on his mind.
Hi, Alan. It's Dan Shapiro. Until recently, the United States Ambassador in Israel, and now staying in Tel Aviv at the Institute for National Security Studies for a period of time to do some writing and some thinking about the U.S.-Israel relationship and the Middle East from the perspective outside of government. Thanks for all your contributions over the years to that relationship and to my own understanding of the very dynamic relationship between the United States and Israel. I actually have a question that's more about things happening back home, since I've been away from home for a number of years. And that has to do with this recent wave of anti-Semitic incidents. I'm interested in your analysis of what's behind it. I think we can stipulate to the fact that there is anti-Semitism among the left, on the far left. There's anti-Semitism on the far right. So I'm not making assumptions about the cause. I'm interested in your analysis of what's behind the recent wave of anti-Semitic incidents, of threats against Jewish institutions, community centers and day schools and synagogues and cemeteries. Whether you think the administration's response to it has been adequate and as it should be, and overall what you think needs to be done, both at a policy level and at an education level, to address this current wave. Look forward to your answer.
Anytime there's anti-Semitism, threats to Jewish community centers, it's a terrible thing. Many kids had to be sent home. People were frightened out of their wits. Thankfully, there were no bombs found. There were gravestones toppled. It's a terrible, terrible thing. I do think that the administration should do more. I worry that the alt-right anti-Semites have been emboldened. I don't think for a moment that Donald Trump is an anti-Semite or supports any of these actions, but I do think he could do more and say more. And I do think Vice President Pence has done a very good job in helping to clean up the cemetery damage. But they can do more. But there is a big difference between the anti-Semitism of the right and the left. The anti-Semitism coming from the right is universally condemned. Nobody justifies it. Nobody supports it. It's condemned universally. But the anti-Semitism on college campuses that comes from the hard left is not condemned. In fact, it's often praised because it disguises itself as anti-Zionism. But if you just scratch beneath the surface, you see that there are anti-Semitic tropes throughout. Recently on college campuses, there were leaflets circulated saying white privilege has to end and it has to start with ending Jewish privilege. Leaflets equating Zionism with Nazism. We don't know for sure whether these leaflets come from the right or from the left. Of course, the hard right and the hard left have in common, historically, anti-Semitism. Jews, the nation state of the Jewish people, thrive at the center. And I've been trying to restore the dialogue to the center, center conservatives versus center liberals. I think that the administration has to condemn with equal voice anti-Semitism on both sides. Where I think there's been a big failing is I think that the liberal left has not done enough to condemn the anti-Semitism of the hard left, and the conservative right hasn't done enough to condemn the anti-Semitism of the hard right. I think we centrists have an obligation to speak to our side. People on the left have to be very vocal in condemning left-wing anti-Semitism. People on the right have to be very vocal in condemning right-wing anti-Semitism. It's so easy to condemn your opponents, for the left to condemn the right, for the right to condemn the left. It's crucial for each of us to condemn people on our side. So, Ambassador, I wish you well in your writing. I look forward to reading what you write. I know you will write brilliantly, as you were a brilliant ambassador. I remember being to your home in Herzliya and conducting a seminar. I look forward to continuing that tradition, whoever the ambassador is, and I look forward to a strong Israeli-American relationship, always bolstered by whoever the ambassador from the United States happens to be. So thank you again, Ambassador.
Let's hear from Danny Gerwitz and David Brin.
Hi, Alan. This is Danny Gewirtz.
This is David Brin.
We are residents of Ma'ale Adumim. And Alan, I know you know my father from the old stomping grounds back at the days of Tampa Lake and Borough Park. I'm also the co-founder of American Football in Israel, where it's not just a outlet for aspiring football players, but actually a platform for coexistence. One of our quarterbacks was Itai Ashkenazi, the son of the former Ramatkal, Gabi Ashkenazi, and I know he played in a semi-final game against some Palestinians. So there you have it. David is managing editor of the Jerusalem Post, and he will now ask you a question. So David, I'm going to throw the ball over to you.
Thanks, Danny. Hi, Alan. Looking forward to seeing you at the Jerusalem Post Annual Conference in New York City on May 7th. It's always great to hear your insights. My question is about where we're standing, about Ma'ale Adumim, a city of almost over 40,000 Israelis. There's been a campaign recently by members of Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition to invoke legislation to annex Ma'ale Adumim. I'd like to hear your views on that, what you think about it. Is it the right time, the wrong time? What are the legal implications? And I look forward to hearing your answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you so much. Hey, I loved your father, Abi Gewirtz. He was the greatest ball player in modern Borough Park history. He was a couple of years older than me. He really taught me how to drive the hoop and take my jump shot from the corner. He was also a great camp counselor in Camp Maple Lake, where I really thrived and became an adult. And football in Israel, hey, that's great. Bob Kraft's a good friend of mine, and I know that Bob and his late great wife Myra have a football facility named after them. So I'm all in favor of football in Israel. Look, I'm a big Patriots fan, and if you want to talk about miracles, what the Patriots pulled off in the last two Super Bowls, they won them both unexpectedly at the not only the last second, the last one, of course, in overtime after making two-point conversions at the end of the game. Amazing, amazing stuff. So I hope football comes to Israel in a big, big way. Ma'ale Adumim. Look, Ma'ale Adumim will remain part of Israel forever. I've discussed it with Abbas. I've discussed it with the former Prime Minister Fayyad, and of course I've discussed it with Israeli leaders. Ma'ale Adumim is part of Israel, will always be part of Israel, but it should not be annexed until a deal is made. It's de facto part of Israel. There will be, if there is a two-state solution, there will be land swaps, Ma'ale Adumim, Gilo. Other areas that are close to Jerusalem will remain part of Israel, but Israel will have to give up some land in the north in exchange for that. But I don't think that annexation at this point would be recognized by almost any country in the world. It would be a unilateral act and probably one that would make peace a little bit more difficult. I'm a strong supporter of two-state solution, of peace. I'm a strong supporter for maintaining Israel's connections to Ma'ale Adumim, Gilo, and the other areas that are close to Jerusalem and within the security boundaries of Israel. I think a negotiation should occur. I know that President Trump, who I recently met with, is anxious to bring about a negotiated deal. I know that Prime Minister Netanyahu is anxious to bring about a negotiated deal. I'm not so sure about Abbas. He talks a good game. He says he's interested, but when the opportunities come up, he never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. There was a period of time where Israel ceased all settlement activities in order to bring Abbas to the negotiating table, and he waited 9 months until basically the settlement freeze was over. The Abbas has to show that he's willing to make the kind of compromises that will bring about a negotiated two-state solution. In the meantime, Israelis ought to live and thrive, and Ma'ale Adumim, there ought to be no boycott of any products there. What happened to SodaStream should not happen to any other company. Ma'ale Adumim is an integral part of Israel, and it will be so recognized in any negotiated peace resolution.
Today, our first guest is David Flon, born in Cuba. David is a prominent lawyer and businessman who serves as Israel's honorary consul for Puerto Rico. David is also an old friend of yours. On a recent visit to Israel, he took your advice and made a day trip that answered a lot of issues, but also raised some questions. Let's hear from him.
Alan, for a long time you've been suggesting that I go see Ramallah for myself, and I finally did. And what I found was that there was absolutely no military occupation. I did not see one Israeli soldier from the time I left the checkpoint in Israel until the end of my stay in Ramallah. And I found a lot of modern hospitals, high-tech buildings, modern office buildings, fancy cars, a lot of successful, hardworking people, and people who want to have a solution to the situation with a two-state solution with Israel. So this is what I taped while I was there for. Hi, Alan. I'm here in Ramallah, of all places, and from the people I've spoken to, much like most Israelis, everybody's looking forward and wish a two-state solution. What can we do to make this happen? For how much longer can Israel continue to be a Jewish and, more importantly, a democratic state without a two-state solution? Hope to see you soon.
David, it's so nice to hear from you and to see you in Ramallah. David Efron is a great lawyer and a great friend of Israel. He serves in an honorary capacity as the consul in Puerto Rico. He's originally a Cuban Jew, a very prominent person in Miami. So I really appreciate your question. David, as you know, I have urged people, students and others, that their first stop when they go to the Middle East for the first time, the first stop should always be Ramallah, because it immediately tells the viewer that what he's been hearing about the occupation is only a partial truth and really not a truth at all. That there are parts of the West Bank, Ramallah, Jericho, many others, that are simply not under occupation. You simply never see an Israeli policeman, a soldier. There's self-determination, there's self-rule. And that's what a Palestinian state could look like. You know, when Israel was built, it was built from the ground down. When Winston Churchill came to what was then called Palestine, he said, what is all this talk about a Jewish homeland in the future? There is a Jewish homeland. They have a legislature, they have newspapers, they have universities, they have hospitals. That's the way you build a state, from the bottom up. And I think the Palestinians are building a state in Ramallah and other areas of the West Bank. There is only one solution to the conflict, and that is the two-state solution. It's the only solution that will work. None of the others that have been proposed carry the promise of Israel remaining the nation state of the Jewish people and the democratic nation state of the Jewish people. So we have to move vigorously in that direction. Prime Minister Netanyahu, to his credit, has said that he's ready to negotiate toward a two-state solution with no preconditions, without even the Palestinians announcing in advance that they accept Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. So the ball is now clearly in the Palestinian court. They have to come to the negotiating table. You cannot get a state without negotiation. You're not going to get a state through BDS. You're not going to get a state through the United Nations, through the International Criminal Court. So if the Palestinians want the rest of the West Bank to look like Ramallah with land swaps, obviously, and other accommodations, they have to come to the negotiating table. Both sides have to make the kinds of painful compromises that all real negotiations entail.
All right, Professor Dershowitz. I now want to welcome Tamir Goldstein, a student in political science from Tel Aviv Academic College, and Nir Cohen Pereira, the manager of the Stand With Us Israel Alumni Network. Let's start with you, Tamir. What's on your mind for Professor Dershowitz?
Hey, Alan. My question is about branding, I guess. I just came back from Seattle, Washington, from the Pacific Northwest, as a shaliach for STEM with us. And my job was to go from one campus to another, from high school to another, and basically talk about Israel and do pro-Israel activity. And one of the problems that I encountered was that in some areas, every time that we wanted to do a pro-Israel activity, people didn't show up. And every time that a BDS movement wanted to do some sort of activity, it was a full house. And I think there's a problem with the branding. How can we brand Israel as something cool, I want to say, and get people more engaged and more involved with pro-Israel activity?
That's a great question, Tamir. And it's a very difficult one because it's much easier to brand negatively than to brand positively. And the BDS hate movement finds people on the hard left supportive. Many of them don't understand what it is. They don't understand that it includes even people like me. Just because I'm Jewish and support Israel, I'm part of the BDS movement. How do I know that? Because Barghouti, the founder, has said that. He refused to debate me at Oxford University, just like Matisyahu was condemned, even though he's not Israeli, because he's Jewish. He was asked to condemn Israel. I was asked once, as a condition to speaking at Johns Hopkins University by a group of students, to start my speech by saying that Israel is guilty of war crimes. Of course, I refused to do it. They claimed I was harassing them because I refused to do it. That kind of branding is easy at colleges. It's hard to support Israel on campus today because it's not, quote, cool. Many faculty members who support Israel quietly or in their own synagogues refuse to speak out on college campuses. So you and I have a task, and stand with us as part of that job, to increase positive support for Israel, make the world know about Israel's positive contributions to the world. Look, the best answer to BDS is for Israel to create products that the world can't do without. If Israel manages to create a system around the world where water can be taken from the air, let the BDSers say we won't drink that water. Let the BDSers say we won't use the pharmaceuticals that will save our parents' lives. Let the BDSers say we won't use cell phones and computers that have products inside them that are manufactured and designed in Israel. That's the best answer, and branding Israel in a positive way is important. So thank you for what you do and your efforts in the Northwest and other parts of the world on behalf of Israel and behalf of Stand With Us.
All right, Professor Dershowitz, we're running out of time, so we have very little time for our next question, but we do want to get your answer. Nir, who is sitting with us, it looks like you also get the chance to ask that final question, so make it a good one.
So hi, Professor. So when people try to make the case about Israel, they focus on America and Europe, but I think people are ignoring what's going on in Latin America and in Asia. I want to know what is your case about that, and should we do more over there? And on a different subject, one that is closer to my heart than other Israelis, what do you think about Omri Caspi moving to Minnesota?
Well, first, Omri Caspi, of course, I'm a big fan. He was injured, and it looked like maybe his season was over, but now he's been picked up by Minnesota, and I hope he will help them get into the playoffs. As some of you know, my son has been working for the NBA for many, many years. He is chief counsel for the Women's National Basketball Association and associate counsel for the NBA itself. So I follow basketball. I played basketball in high school, not as good as Avi Gewirtz, but I played basketball in high school. And Caspi is a great, great ball player, a great playmaker, a great defensive player. I hope we'll see him shine with his new team. First of all, Israel is doing a great deal in Asia. They are building bridges in India. They are building bridges in China. The prime minister has been in Asia and has done a great job, I think, in creating closer relationships between Israel and Asia. Latin America is a very tough sell. Venezuela, of course, is virulently anti-Israel, and we've benefited from that here in South Florida because we've gotten thousands of Venezuelan Jews who are creative and brilliant and productive moving to Florida. This influx of Venezuelan Jews has benefited Florida at the expense of Venezuela. I think other countries like Brazil and Argentina, more effort should be made to try to create better relationships. Colombia, other countries as well. I think efforts are being made. As you know, tremendous strides are being made in Africa, where Israel is really helping Africa to increase its productivity and increase its influence in the world. And I think Israel has played a substantial role in that. Look, Israel has become diplomatically a major force in the world today, and it has to go where the new developments are going, and that is Asia, South America, Africa. I think it's having a hard time in Western Europe, but even there, I think there are many more pro-Israel people than are willing to speak out. So Israel's diplomacy is very important, and I completely agree that it has to be extended to those parts of the world that are increasing in influence and increasing in power.
Today, our first guest is Eitan Campbell, the director of the Masada National Park, who's actually originally from Chicago. For those of our viewers who don't know, Masada is an ancient fortress built by King Herod near the Dead Sea and was a stronghold of the Jewish forces after the destruction of the Second Temple until they were defeated by the Romans after a siege and chose death instead of going into slavery. Today, the remains of the fortress are well preserved and the site has become an icon of Jewish perseverance. Let's hear what Eitan Campbell has to say about this special place.
Shalom Allan, this is Eitan from Masada. It was a pleasure taking you and your friends around the mountain. And as you know, this mountain has a very powerful meaning to all of us here in Israel and probably around the world. But the oppression and the question of living in freedom or dying in slavery is a big question, and it's become sort of a symbol for the country. And we quote always, Masada shall not fall again. And what does that actually mean? We've been accused of having here in Israel a Masada complex. And when Prime Minister Golda Meir was asked, is this true? Do we have a Masada complex? She answered in the affirmative, yes. Masada complex, a pogrom complex, and a Hitler complex. I would appreciate your thoughts on this issue, and if you could share it with us, it would be great. All the best. Look forward to seeing you again at Masada.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for preserving this great place of Jewish history. I don't think that Israelis have a Masada complex, and I don't think the Jews around the world have a Masada complex. It would be understandable if we did in light of the Shoah, and of course during the Shoah, there were people who chose death instead of rape and other abuses, young women and others. But I think today the options are not seen as suicide or captivity. The options are seen as passivity or fighting back, or passivity and preemption. And Israel has shown that it's capable of taking preemptive actions to avoid having the choice, the tragic choice that was presented at Masada. Israel has conducted its armed forces in a moral way, used preemption when appropriate during the Six-Day War, in the attack on the Osiris reactor. Hopefully it will not have to use that same preemption to attack Iran if it seeks to develop, as I'm sure it will, a nuclear arsenal. But I think the options are no longer the options that were presented at Masada. I think the goal of Israel and the goal of the Jewish people is to prevent any such choices ever being presented to the state of Israel or to the Jewish people again. And I think Israel does a great job in preventing that choice. So no, I don't believe we do have a Masada complex. I don't believe we should. Masada was one of the first places I visited when I came to Israel back in 1970, and it had a very powerful impact on me. And I kept on my desk for years the medal of Masada, and with the slogan that it will never happen again. But I think the way to avoid Masada is to avoid making sure that the Jewish people, the nation state of the Jewish people, is ever put in the position that the Romans put the Jews during that siege. So no, we do not and should not have a Masada complex.
That wraps up this edition of One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. If you'd like Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, go to iltv.tv or our Facebook page and submit them. We'll see you again next week.